So it is being recorded. So thank you so much, Felix, for joining us today. We have a very hot topic to discuss. Are you ready to put the pieces together? Learn how to prepare for today's workplace emergencies. We're not just talking about safety and security, but we're talking about, your response teams and communication, how you're managing through that communication, how all of that is being documented, who are your trusted advisors that you go to during those emergencies. And ultimately, we brought Felix on because we believe 100% in his opinion, in his insight. He brings a different perspective to planning, preparing, and ultimately preventing workplace emergencies, because none of us want it to get to the point where it is an emergency. We all want to make sure that organizations and individuals within those organizations are prepared ahead of time and hopefully are taking the necessary steps to empower their employees, to give them what they need so that we're working through preventative measures as opposed to being reactive to situations, right?
Yeah.
So with that being said, let me introduce to you our guest speaker today. This is Felix Nader. He is a security management consultant and is the president and owner of Nader Associates. Him and I have gotten to know each other over the years, and I absolutely, whenever I have a problem or an issue, or if I'm consulting with one of our customers, I reach out to him to get his perspective and direction. He is a nationally recognized, highly skilled workplace violence prevention advisor and consultant with over 30 years of federal law enforcement and consulting experience as a workplace violence prevention consultant. He's a certified security consultant as awarded by the International Association of Professional Security Consultants. And to be honest, that's a long way to say anybody that I talk to in safety and security has heard of Felix Nader, okay?
Very nice.
Especially when I'm talking to my East Coast associates. All I have to mention is your first name, Felix. And they're like, Felix Nader? Yes, I know who you're talking about. He's wonderful. He's amazing. So we're very, very honored to have you as a guest speaker, and we truly appreciate your time today.
Thank you very much, Ashley. I really, really am humbled by that incredible introduction. Thank you.
So Felix, I know this answer, but I definitely want others, want you to be able to share it with others. Why don't you start off by telling us how you first got involved in your current consulting practice? We know that you're retired after 26 years as a United States Postal Inspector.
Right.
Also retired from the U.S. Army Reserves.
Yes.
Curious, right, to know where you get your energy from, what keeps you going.
I live every day like it's the last day of my life, Ashley.
Yes.
I put into it as much as I can so that the reciprocal response is equivalent to my offering. So my energy is predicated on if I do a good job today, I'll be around tomorrow, I'll do the same thing over again.
Yes.
But let me tell you how I got involved, because it was all an accident, and it'll take you also to how I became a security management consultant specializing in workplace violence. So back in 1985, I was minding my business in my office in New York, and my young assistant inspector in charge asked me to consider putting in for a position in Washington, D.C. that dealt with public information and the dissemination of that information in order to create a better image and brand for the postal inspectors. I didn't want it because it didn't entail going out in the street and locking people up, or training inspectors to do the things that they were hired to do, or working with postal police officers on helping them deploy their assets a little better. But a year later, I did decide that it was something worthwhile for me to consider. So I put in for the job, and I became the office's first ever public information officer in DC. And August 20th, 1986, Edmonton Post Office had the first tragedy ever in the history of the United States Postal Service and the nation at the time, involving a tragedy in the post office, involving a young, disgruntled, heavily problematic Army veteran, not Vietnam, Army veteran, who was an employee of the Edmonton post office, and nobody was listening to everything he was espousing, spewing. And one day on August 20th, 1986, he came in and shot and killed 20 coworkers.
Oh my goodness.
Yes. I was on the desk as the public information officer. It was the first time that the regional chief had direct contact with me in my office, and the word was, "Hey, we just had a shooting. Here's the information. I don't know nothing. Please get on it as quickly as you can." That was my first encounter. The guys assigned, the inspectors assigned to the actual investigation of that matter were phenomenal. The acquisition of my insight was really derived from all of the data that came across my desk regarding how they were conducting the investigation. And I really, really didn't think that it was going to be a long-lasting retention that I would need to use forever and ever. But as it moved me from that assignment to other assignments in Washington, D.C., and then back out to the field, in 1992, the chief inspector said, "Hey, we need to form these divisional workplace violence prevention teams." And my boss in New York at the time said, "Hey, we got one right here that could head up our unit in New York at the time."
Yeah.
A person of one, me.
Yes.
Did that for 8 years with great success. What I would consider to be two failures. Two employees committed suicide on my watch. And I can tell you the reasons why that happened, and it had nothing to do solely because of their mental well-being, but as much as the conditions that exacerbated their will to bring it all to an end, including dishonest management skills, dishonest management approaches to problems, inability to really, really connect with the employee as a parent, leader, manager should do. Sure. I retired in December 31st of 2000 officially. My retirement party was on February 3rd, 2001. It was a huge gathering, humbling in terms of the number of people who showed up. I had no aspirations of working again, ever working again. You know what happened September 11th, right, Ashley?
Yes,
2001.
I remember exactly where I was too.
There you go. And I'm sure everybody that might be on this call would also remember. I got a call from the HR director of the Long Island division of the Postal Service begging for me to consider putting in a proposal for security of their Long Island facilities. And I said, nope, I'm retired.
Yeah.
Make a long story short, I did finally take it on November of that year. And I have been enjoying it from the perspective of not trying to be in the trenches with the problem, but at the senior management level and helping them recognize what the problems are and how contributing factors, not necessarily risk factors and warning signs left alone, are going to cause the explosion. It's contributing factors that are the trigger that eventually cause that person who has justified and rationalized that nobody gives a sugar, honey, ice, and tea about them.
Yeah.
That says, you don't care, I don't care. And in Peter Ouspensky's book, The Russian Philosopher of Managing Fear, he talks about it from a spiritual perspective. He says in the Bible, there's rationale means you have a right to discover for yourself what you need to do.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
he talks about when a person decides that they are justified in their actions, there's nothing you could do about turning their desires and emotions around. They're committed, they're devoted to their intentions. And that's how we got that first incident in Oklahoma. And then the following 7 incidents until 1995, more or less, that really, really caused the Postal Inspection Service and the Postal Service to really ramp up their prevention methodology. And we were very successful.
Well, yeah, that I can't even imagine, experiencing all of those things. I know I've been caught in different situations at a very lower level, but just having that kind of insight into those bigger events and being a part of that kind of ground zero team,
Yes.
I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall for that. Not because I agreed with the situation that happened by any means, but just because I'm so interested in kind of the intricacies of collaborative
Yes.
environments that come together, and organizations that partner together, and seeing the beauty of those partnerships come to fruition.
Yes. Yes. And as a caveat to what you said about collaboration and partnership, the Postal Inspection Service was always an innovative, creative organization that looked at investigations and auditing and assessments from an impactor. How does what I do impact the business? And how does what I do impact the safety and security of the workforce? So whether it was an armed robbery or a robbery of a letter carrier, a post office, or a hijacking, any one of those cases that we may have investigated, we were always required to figure out how we can stop this particular event from happening the same way it happened. And we would take the intel, the intelligence, and the information, and we developed these 15-minute training programs for our employees in the stations so that they could be aware of situational awareness. They could be aware of what to look for and what to do and what not to do.
Yeah.
So partnerships were very important.
Absolutely. So with workplace violence, you know, since the topic of conversation is workplace violence, right? And we're preventative and preventing workplace emergencies. You know, with workplace violence being perceived as, you know, a workplace and school place security reality these days, right?
Yes.
How do you see the threat, workplace violence, being managed, reduced, or prevented, you know, from your perspective?
Proactive versus then reactive.
Yes.
We know we need to have reactive in the back of our minds, but reactive really applies when the proverbial sugar, honey, ice, and tea hits the wall and the person comes through the door and starts shooting. The reactionary response to that should have been predicated as a baseline from quality training that empowers the employee to know what to do, not in a state of panic, but in a trained reactionary mode.
Yes.
The proactive part, which is essentially and intrinsically tied to program management and program development, is what will keep our butts out of civil liability when the issue is known hazards and foreseeability in not recognizing what prevention measures you could have deployed. And oh, by the way, not just something that's a finger in the dike, but long-term value that protects the organization, the workforce, the vendors, the clients, anybody associated with the organization that employs and conducts business with vendors. So program development, program management are critically important in having someone in the organization, whether it's a supervisor responsible for it, that really is the organization's subject matter expert, sort of like what I try to call myself, constantly researching, playing the armchair analyst, taking high-profile media cases and taking them back to their environments and having discussions around a table that elevates everybody's awareness so that there's someone that's keeping their eye on the issue of known risk hazards that could really expose an organization to civil liability. Let me inject, because oftentimes people don't recognize what a known risk hazard is when it relates to OSHA. So there was a recent case in 2012, and you can look it up, folks. It's the Integra Health Management case involving a social worker that was fatally stabbed at the client's home. The problem with the death was that the employee had been warning the employer through the supervisor that there were concerns that needed to be addressed, and they failed to take appropriate actions. OSHA cited that organization, and OSHA prevailed. The administrative law judge said, in fact, that when the employee reported to you, you failed to take appropriate action. Training was not enough. You had to make sure that training supported a procedure and that training supported a policy, and that there were policies and procedures in place that were not in place. So when folks say, well, I'm doing training, baloney, you know, what kind of training? How is it tied to creating an organizational change to improve the situation going forward? And is the issue in hand being used as a training instrument to alert other employees to the possibility of them being at risk? And then what are we doing to mitigate their risk? So that's an important case that everybody should go back and research, because really OSHA came back and said exactly what I consult on. OSHA came back and said, you got to have a written prevention program in place. You have to determine the prior predisposition of people who first come to your attention and whether or not they have capabilities. And that's threat assessment, and you might want to consider that as well. And then you have to have procedures in place that not only communicate, but also train to those procedures, and then provide additional training to how the employees need to respond either in a workplace to a minor non-fatal situation, or in a workplace to a potentially homicidal threat. And then establishing liaisons with people that could be of assistance to you outside of the organization as part of multiple intervention strategies that you should have available. That's why program management actually is critically important, having somebody who knows how to touch these various external assets when there's a need for multiple intervention.
So you make a good point, and I have kind of a side question for you that just came to mind. OSHA, in your perspective, when I speak with organizations, they tend to think of OSHA and not be nervous or scared, but just, I don't know, does OSHA have some sort of, I know that obviously, there's OSHA requirements and regulations and things like that. And then if something happens in the workplace, OSHA comes in and kind of investigates or, potentially investigates. Can you just talk a little bit about kind of, is OSHA perceived in a negative way? Is there a way that we can change their thought process to perceive OSHA in a positive way? Because there is a lot of good things that OSHA does for organizations.
That's a great question. That is a wonderful question from the standpoint of OSHA's dual function. And by that I mean is this, that OSHA, since I've been involved in this, going back to 1986 when I started reviewing what was in place, has been giving away free advice, support, and assistance. So anyone who wanted particular insights on how to roll out an effective workplace violence prevention program. And it was all being done under what we call volunteerism. It was all volunteerism until April 10th, 2010, September 10th, rather, 2010, when that whole enforcement approach to citations and investigating and enforcing violations was taken to a higher level. And in that regard, they developed a program that was really, from the second perspective, was really designed to give the employer a heads up as to the nature and origin of the complaint allegation filed by the employee, or as it was reported to them and then they assessed and evaluated, so that the organization could have more than sufficient time in rectifying the alleged hazard. It was only in situations where the matter was so in your face, I'm doing nothing about it. I've hired attorneys who are more than capable to meet you at the pass, Mr. OSHA, Ms. OSHA. So I'm not going to do anything about it. Was OSHA then strapping on their two guns and going out and digging and interviewing people and doing their own investigation, as they did in this investigation with Integra, that they then will even though there is no specific regulation that says they have the authority to enforce criminal sanctions, they do have the authority to issue citations that if you do nothing with, I admire them in how they pursue your brand. If you do nothing with, they issue a press release that says, Felix Nader's company was cited on this day for the following incidents, and they failed to correct them going back to 5 years. For every day they fail to take corrective action, they will be fined this amount daily until that problem is resolved. So they do it that way to get the attention of some organizations that laugh in their face, and they've been quite successful.
Yeah. Well, and I think you spoke to this a little bit before about reporting, tracking, and monitoring, right? So if you have a communication solution in place and are reporting, tracking, and monitoring those incidents and situations, that will help in your OSHA investigation, correct? Like, so if somebody comes from OSHA into the organization and is looking for information, it's kind of in a nice little pretty package for them to go through. They can see a timeline of the incident, a summary and history, and kind of get all the information that they need all in one place, essentially.
Yeah. I think when you go back to the importance of developing a program and managing that program, sub-components of that is a credible reporting system. How do you manage, how do you reduce, how do you prevent, tracking and monitoring system? Now, I want to be brutally honest because we've got to collaborate in organizations. We've got to dismantle the silos. We've got to really want to talk in terms of organizational partnership. You know, HR is a very, very formidable entity in most organizations that have a tremendous amount of, whether they believe it or not, internal capability by virtue of their influence to improve the perception that nothing is being done about workplace violence prevention by dismantling the myths that I commonly encounter by saying privacy, confidentiality doesn't allow us to collect this information, doesn't allow us to track and monitor employee behaviors. Well, you know, at what point are you going to become creative and innovative and say, within those privacy and confidential restrictions, we have a duty, moral and ethical, to come up with a way of protecting not only the workforce, but the bottom line and the organization's brand by saying, we know about Felix. So why are we reassigning Felix to another facility? And a year later, Felix's behavior is going to cause the same problem. We now have an ability to track, monitor because of a reporting system that allows us to be proactive rather than reactive, to say, Felix, come on in here. We're going to give you two options. Here's option number one. You're a great contributing employee, but you got a problem. And we want to help you resolve that problem. Option number two is, if you don't avail yourself of our resources and services, you may be on the unemployment line. And I'm being facetious, but I want to be direct.
Yes, yeah.
And so therefore, the companies who are penny wise and a pound foolish and not recognizing the value of software systems or credible reporting systems, as I call them, that are necessary for the ability of the organization to manage and prevent and detect and deter to keep the employees and the workforce safe today and tomorrow, are being foolish because foreseeability, as OSHA has been preaching for years, is easy to prove.
Yeah.
It's easy to prove when an employee says, you know why Felix got beat up in the parking lot? Because we've been complaining about that light that hasn't been repaired for the last 2 weeks. And he got beat up under that light, that area in the section of the parking lot that was poorly lit. That's foreseeable, and that was preventable, you know? Yep. Or when the employee that was released under less than attractive conditions with a poor termination package, beginning with attitude and how he or she was dismissed, they know how to get back in. And they know a back door that was not properly secured is still unsecured because they're visiting their former employers to discuss COPA, discuss packages, health services, payment issues. So they pretty much know that things are the way they were. Weak gaps in security still exist. They're going to come in the same way. So foreseeability for organizations that lawyer up are for guys that are involved in the forensic assessment and evaluation are easy to uncover because they exist.
Yeah.
So program management is key. Prevention is key. That little factor called active shooter, run, hide, and fight, that should be a discussion that is important to have, but you never program for because you run an organization that is such above reproach that everybody understands. When you've got an issue, you bring it to us and we resolve that issue. You have a problem in the street with a delivery, we're going to take care of that problem because we have partners in the local police department who will help us address your risk.
So then let me ask you this. What can organizations initially do to evaluate their current workplace security posture?
Yes.
And what can they do to ensure a safer tomorrow for workplace and, you know, for those that come from educational field, you know, the school places? Because, I mean, as a parent, going to school or sending your kids to school these days too is just as serious, right, as workplace violence. So what could they do, you know, to evaluate where their current climate?
Again, tied in directly with program management and program implementation, another component of that is assessment of your workplace posture, security posture, and assessment of your employees' perception of their impressions of management's ability and capability to provide for their safety. Don't be afraid of asking questions. The assessment, I have them. You know, they may be manual, but I have them. They're easy to get out to the field and selectively ask or ask everyone. You know, a questionnaire checklist. hire or ask me to provide you a checklist that you can use on your own. Hire someone like me to come in and do both a security assessment and a workplace violence assessment that will give you a critical assessment, either formally in a report and informally in an after-action briefing of your gaps in your security. You review your existing policies and plans and procedures to see if there are any gaps in there that might contribute to a lack of awareness or not focusing in on where the training content should be to address particular issues regarding the policies that may be uninformed, unknown, training that's not supporting the procedures and procedures that are not implemented because no one is taking time to understand why. I find that in many of these situations, they're always talking about how to do something and what to do about it, but they never ask why. You know, how do we get to this? You got to ask why. Why are we doing this? And so that assessment component of really making you a greater witness on the witness stand makes your chest inflate with pride because you did all the things that you possibly could do. And this was just an unfortunate event that happened because the person was premeditated in doing what they wanted to do.
You know, I definitely see the value in bringing you on and having those assessments. For organizations that I've worked for in the past and those that I communicate with on a daily basis, part of the concern of the employees is will those assessments provide, I guess what I'm trying to say is do they trust their leadership teams enough to, follow through with those assessments and actually action those assessments. So I absolutely see the value of bringing you in as a third party to it because I feel like a lot of the employees would be more open to sharing, knowing that it wasn't going directly to their upper management. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. An unspoken term that I use and that relates directly to the nature of my work is ethical conduct. So whatever is discovered and disclosed from those assessments, if the workforce is expected to have trust confidence in management's ability to provide for their safe and secure workplace, there has to be a demonstrated evidentiary presentation that at least there's an effort to try and correct those observations that employees bring to their attention. That's the only way you shore up the gap of lack of trust, faith, and confidence by employees seeing, oh, they fixed the light in the parking lot. Oh, they finally fixed that broken door that the lock doesn't properly. Oh, they fixed the air conditioning in my delivery truck so I don't have to keep the windows open so the robber doesn't have to jump on my running board to stick a gun and rob me. When they start seeing those quantifiably measurable improvements, the trust factor goes up. So there has to be a demonstration of credibility on management's part to want to implement the assessment recommendations that emanate from those observations and findings. And oh, by the way, a really big negative impediment that the workplace can't seem to re-innovate and use as a more effective tool is zero tolerance. Yeah. Zero tolerance is a legal structure that unfortunately forces the organization to take one action and one action only. Discipline. And unfortunately, employees are never going to overcome that known reality that if they want to help Felix, the last thing in the world you need to do is inform management that Felix is acting in a threatening and harassing manner because he's going to get disciplined.
Yeah.
So that's why you'll always find, following an incident, Ashley, you'll always find reporters who are smart enough to go up to employees and say, so what do you have to say? Oh, we've always known Felix had a problem, but that was a family problem, but the workplace always held it against him because he couldn't come to work. So we didn't want to see him get in trouble, so we didn't tell anybody.
Yeah.
We got to break down, dismantle those barriers of communication and really create value based on credibility. Do something when you see something is really nice, but reality, when you're speaking to adults, there is no credibility in that because there's always ramifications. If I drop a dime on Felix, will Felix come after me or will the organization come after me? And will the organization protect me when Felix comes after me? You follow me?
Yep.
So you need to come up with a system that allows you to, as an organization, do a better job. And I think really monitoring, the reporting system is critical, monitoring, tracking, and getting off the proverbial, pushback that says, we can't track, we can't monitor, be creative, be innovative, sit down with your smart lawyers. They want to avoid these situations. They don't want to go to court and defend these cases because invariably they lose unless they're working with a sharp firm that is proactive.
So once an organization has gone through that initial assessment, you think they're ready to kind of move forward in continuing the culture that you have worked with them to establish. Part of that is streamlining the communication, I'm assuming, throughout that process. I know you and I have talked about PunchAlert in the past being a communication solution. Is that, from what I understand with the consultants that I speak with, communication is key, obviously. You also talk a lot about integration, collaboration, coordination, right, of efforts.
Yes.
A solution such as PunchAlert being implemented once the organization is at a place where they can, start that engaging in that two-way communication, right? And then the employees feel comfortable enough to see something, share something. And it could be anonymously, or it could be, they could just share it.
Yes.
You see the value in a communication solution like that.
I see a value in a communication system like what you just suggested your firm offers, because from an ACE factor, and you want to ask me, what does ACE stand for, Felix?
Yeah. What does it stand for?
Yes. So in my violence interdiction model, which is based on a gentleman that I love, his name is Jay Abraham. He's a marketing guru, and he has principles of preeminence that he founded his company on. Well, I have my violence interdiction model based on his preeminence model that talks about exceeding the client's expectations of what she believes are your deliverables. And unfortunately, those people in these positions, whether you're security director, facility manager responsible for security and safety guy responsible, or HR director, we don't look at ourselves in the mirrors as consultants. We look at us as employees. And when you have an employee vantage point perspective, you're not looking from a creative, innovative point of view. And so you don't see it the way I see it. Look, having a credible reporting system that communicates your organization's intentions in a high stress situation also allays the concerns of the workforce who might be caught up in that situation.
Sure.
It also allays the concern because when you talk about the unfortunate Stony Brook shooting where the teacher and 13 kids were holed up in the bathroom, and they were holed up in that bathroom until they were convinced that the police on the outside were police before they opened the door. Imagine having the capability of being monitored, tracked, and knowing where you are, and you having the ability to communicate with the good guys as to where you are so that the proper approach can be used to allay your concerns about who these people are.
Absolutely.
Partly important. A friend of mine who now works for another organization in his other life was going to a meeting, and I won't reveal the location because it might reveal the large organization that's involved. Going to a meeting, they stopped at Starbucks, and as they approached their particular venue, gunshots in the building that they were approaching. There was a gunman who was entering the place going after the supervisor, and of course he killed himself after killing some folks. He says to me, imagine if there was that ability to be able to communicate before I entered that environment, that there was an adverse situation impending, don't go in.
Yeah, exactly.
Imagine. We overlook these things because those of us in these positions have the wherewithal, have the knowledge, have the abilities, but when we report it, it falls on deaf ears. When we inform them, it falls on deaf ears. And courts, Ashley, are no longer allowing corporations, schools to use the excuse a budget or lack of training resources.
Yeah.
As viable, legitimate alibis anymore. Courts don't care. Judges don't care. What did you do, and why didn't you take the action that was appropriate is what they're more concerned with. Well,
yeah, there's, due diligence, duty of care that falls into it now that it's unacceptable otherwise, right?
Right.
Like you haven't even looked at any security practices and procedures, or you haven't looked at solutions that are available to you. Okay, where's your
Yeah.
due diligence? You
What
know?
did you do? Yeah. And we in the industry, we have to get our ducks in order too. Mass shooter is not an active shooter. You
Yeah.
know, public space is not a workplace or a school place environment. A public place shooter like the Mandalay situation or the Aurora, Illinois movie theater situation, that's a public situation involving people he doesn't know, and so he's exacting his vengeance to get even with somebody.
Yep.
In a workplace, there's a direct connection, and those issues are entirely different. And so we mustn't muddy the waters by uh, interchanging the use of terminology, because you, the non-security law enforcement person, is confused. How do I train? How do I deploy? How do I implement when I don't understand what it is I'm supposed to be protecting and why?
Exactly. Well, I want to be respectful of your time, Felix. I know I've kept you on here and drilled you full of
Well,
questions.
thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure.
But, just in closing, and thank you very much for speaking so highly about PunchAlert, by the way. It's a very near and dear to my heart, not only because I work for the company, but because it's very important to me that there is a all-in-one solution out there that can integrate all of your security systems and all of your different departments to be able to crowdsource information and keep that communication internal. I mean, that's probably one of the number one things.
Yes.
Social media these days, everybody starts sharing everything everywhere, and then it's
Okay.
banned for the organization, and then it's cleanup at that point.
Yes.
So we could probably spend a whole nother webinar just on that topic.
No
But
doubt.
I truly appreciate your time. In closing, what 3 things would you recommend, regardless of whether you are a small, medium, or large business, or county, state, or federal government organization? What would you recommend from your perspective that would be some key takeaways for them?
Okay. And I'll tie it into what we talked about today. Okay. I would ask you to establish a baseline, create a program that is unique to your organization, and make it comprehensive, not complicated, make it comprehensive. And what do I mean by comprehensive? Quickly, is if you employ employees that interact with the public, make sure it addresses those risks. If you employ employees that interact with other organizations outside of your main building, make sure they understand those risks. Train everybody consistently with the unique risk that your organization can expect to experience. And number 2 is do assessments, whether it's employees and it creates more work for you, assessments, or your limited knowledge of how to conduct your own physical security and even workplace violence prevention assessments. You know why? Because from those gaps, it allows you to implement procedures to minimize the gaps, and policies to support those procedures, and then training to reinforce the procedures. And in closing, understand that training supports your policies, and training supports your policies, plans, and your procedures. Make sure that when you do training, I know compliance is mandatory in some organizations, but get out of the box. I'm working with a firm out of Atlanta, and they've gotten out of the box. They are making their training customized and more specific to their brand and their uniqueness of their operations, consistent with what the workforce needs for them to negotiate and navigate daily risks. Don't be afraid of making it supportive. Yes, initially it may be in time investment and a financial investment, but in the long run, you build that trust, confidence, and credibility in the workforce, wanting them to be a part of your solution.
Exactly. I'll make a little shout out to Atlanta, by the way. I had the honor of being able to attend one of their Atlanta security councils for the Super Bowl. And
Yes.
I'll just say how impressed I was by the partnership of not only the corporations who do business in Atlanta, but the first responder teams, fire, EMS, police, all of that, the airport, the transit system, the different volunteer associations. I mean, the collaboration that I saw between those groups of folks was
Mhm.
breath of fresh air. So
Yes, yes.
I just wanted to give that little shout out to Atlanta.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Surprised
Yeah,
that you're seeing an organization come out of Atlanta
yeah.
and be so accepting of that that open mind and that collaborative approach.
At the highest levels, demanding that kind of collaboration and coordination of effort from an operational, legal, compliance, HR, security perspective. Truly coordination.
Yep.
Yeah,
And you make a good point about it being, it needs to be at the highest levels.
it needs to be at the highest levels.
It absolutely does.
It really
And
does.
so I couldn't agree with that more. Well, I thank you so much. I'm just checking to see if there are any questions that came in. Um, Let me just go to the next slide here. If you have questions after that come up, feel free to reach out. Again, I'm Ashley Davis, VP of Community Engagement. My contact information is there. I speak with Felix on the daily, right? No, not really that many times,
Yeah.
but as much as
Frequently,
I
anyway, yeah.
can, I surround myself with you, Felix. And
Yes.
do need to get in contact with Felix, let me know. I'm happy to connect you. I really appreciate your time today, Felix.
Thank
And
you.
I just look forward to what the future continues to bring with our business relationship. And I don't see any other questions coming in. So I just want to say thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to more of these.
Thank you. Thank you. My pleasure. And I hope everybody has a great weekend. I'm heading up to New York in the morning to have a breakfast client meeting on Saturday morning. Then I'm heading to the parks, celebrate a birthday with my youngest brother. Then the beach on Sunday, and who knows what else I'll get into. Yeah.
I wish I could tag along with you. I'm over here in Arizona, sitting in the dead of heat. You know, my husband says to me, how does a trip up north sound? I'm like, that actually sounds really wonderful.
Yes, it does. Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much, Felix.
You bet. Enjoy, everybody. Thank you very much, Ashley.
Thank you.
You bet.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.